Okay, we're good.
Great, thank you. Welcome to the March 2022 meeting of the Boulder Housing Advisory Board. I'm Michael Lucchese, the chair of the Housing Advisory Board, and we'll start the meeting by with roll call and call to order. So Julian?
I am here.
Philip Ogren, our newest member.
Sure.
Terry Palmos. Jen Livovich. Danny Teodoro. Juliet Boone. Juliet.
Hey, everyone.
Great. Let's see, have I missed anybody? I believe I have a quorum, though, right?
Correct.
Great. Okay, so we can go into our agenda. Well, I'll review well, first of all, we're going to welcome two new board members. One has already been sworn in, and one will be a member as of the April meeting. So Philip Ogren, who I met with this week, as I mentioned before. You want to introduce yourself, Philip? We'll give you a warm welcome.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Philip Ogren, actually. And I'm really excited to be on the board. I've been interested in housing policy issues for, 5 to 8 years or so, and been reading and talking and, trying to figure out how to get involved. And so I've been involved in one thing or another for the last couple of years, and I'm just really excited about having a chance to participate here and learn a lot from the community and listen and to learn.
Great. And even though I asked you the other day, I managed to mispronounce your name. I apologize for that, but welcome again. And then Julian Ramsey, a CU student who I had coffee with today, will be an official member of HAB as of next month, but she's going to listen in on today's meeting. You want to say hi, Julianne?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Julian Ramsey. Like Michael said, I'm a CU student in the environmental design program. I'd like to go into urban planning and design, I think. And I'm really excited to be here and learn a lot about housing. Thanks.
Great to have you. So agenda review, will be approving our minutes from November 17, 2021. We skipped our December meeting in favor of a holiday happy hour, and then we lacked quorums in January and February. Did meet, but we did not. We were not able to conduct any official business. Oh gosh, I think it is not on the agenda, but maybe it is. But we really need to thank Jacques Julian, who is concluding his term. It's been a real pleasure to work with you, Jacques. You did a lot of hard work. Actually created one of our significant action steps last year in the mobile ADU recommendation to council. And I hope you will continue to be involved in housing issues and attend our meetings and weigh in as a member of the public. So thank you again. Why don't we all give Jacques a hand?
Thanks, Michael. And yeah, it's been a great 4 years, and it was nice to work with you for a portion of that. And I am not intending to disappear. I will stay involved in the housing discussions here in town. So you'll see me again.
Well, and you're still my neighbor, and I know where you live. So
yeah, there's that too.
Good to know. So we, let's see, after we approve the minutes, we'll have some public participation. I believe we have a couple of people waiting to address us during that period. Item number 6 on the agenda is matters from council. We'll be reviewing the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan draft. I hope you've all had a chance to read our board. Item number 7 is matters from the board. We'll be getting an update on the strategic planning effort of the Department of Housing and Human Services from Wendy Schwartz and Jay Signet. We'll be discussing the Boulder City Council retreat outcomes. I think you all know that the council focused very heavily on housing at their retreat in January. And then I have a proposal related to council that at this point, it's really a notion I have in my head I want to discuss with everyone. Item C will be middle income next steps. For the information of the new members of the board, our board had a retreat last fall and identified middle income thing, increasing the supply of such as a key area of focus for 2022. And then we will further debrief the Housing Equity Symposium that took place on November 10th. Next steps and role of the board. I hope you're all able to attend that or review the recording of that. Item A is matters from staff. Item 9, debrief of the meeting and calendar check of our upcoming meetings, and we'll try to adjourn by 9 p.m. So regarding the minutes, do I have a motion to approve the minutes of November 17th, 2021?
I'll make a motion to approve those minutes. Or did you need a sec?
I think we need a second.
You need a second. I'll second then.
Can he second his own motion?
Second.
Okay, thank you. All in favor of approving the minutes, aye?
Aye.
Okay, I think we saw a passing show of hands.
Aye.
And we are ready for public participation. Do we have any members of the public who would like to take their 3 minutes to speak and address the board?
Hi, yes, I would like to. Can you hear me all?
Yes.
Yes,
Amazing. I'm going to keep my video off because my internet's not super stable, if that's all right with you all.
that's okay. The public doesn't do video anyway. So.
Oh, perfect. Amazing. Well, hello, Boulder Housing Advisory Board members. My name is Grace Jimenez, and I'm speaking to you this evening as a resident of Boulder. I love living in Boulder, and I would love to root myself further in this community if money were no object. But a lack of affordable housing makes it nearly impossible for myself and people like me to stay here. Boulder has the highest median home price on the Front Range. Nearly every single family home goes for well over $1 million. Over 60% of Boulder residents, myself included, just don't earn enough to buy a home here. Even my future salary as an attorney, a salary that will put me well into the middle class and provide a comfortable life for myself, likely won't allow me to buy a home here. This is due, at least in part, I believe, to the fact that Boulder's growth rate is capped at 1%, and a lack of accessory dwelling units doesn't help either. Diversified housing options beyond a single family home is critical to supplement the housing market and meet the increasing demand. Further squeezing the housing market means young adults like myself, eager to start a career and family in Boulder, are unable to do so. Massive appreciation of home prices in Boulder is an incredible win for those lucky individuals who got here many years ago. But for those of us young adults who are starting out, it means we're forced to move away. Home ownership is the most common way for families to build generational wealth. It's certainly what helped my ancestors build wealth in this country as Mexican immigrants. It was a dream of my grandparents and then my parents to own a home in America, and they did it. For me and my peers, homeownership in Boulder, the city that we love, feels like a pipe dream. I fear the things that I love most about Boulder, a young, vibrant city, will be lost if it continues on this path. More and more young, driven, diverse people will continue to leave Boulder and search for more affordable housing. In fact, even renting a home in Boulder is becoming too much of a financial burden for many due to occupancy restrictions. I'll likely have to leave Boulder next year for a more affordable place. I've heard the same story from many of my peers as well. Young adults in Boulder opting for a longer commute, but more reasonable housing outside of the city. I see in myself and my peers a deep desire to continue to invest our futures in Boulder, but I fear those of us who want to live here will never be able to afford to do so. I don't envy the position you are all in. Affordable housing in Boulder doesn't seem to come with a clean, obvious answer. Competing demands and interests are at stake, and balancing those is no easy task. I just hope my words put color to the plight of so many young professionals in Boulder and helps you understand the crossroads we find ourselves in because of a lack of affordable housing options in a city that we love. Support for a young, vibrant, diverse Boulder starts with a foundation built on inclusive housing policies. A diversified housing stock supported by both an increasing growth rate in Boulder, removal of occupancy restrictions could be the first step towards affordable living for those of us that are Boulder residents in a city that we love. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Grace. That was eloquent comment. I do have two quick questions. One is, what would you consider your peer group? And the second is, what is your current housing situation?
Yeah, so my peer group, I'm in my late 20s. I'm actually a law student at the university. And so my peer group is, many people that are in their late 20s, early 30s, I would say, starting families and starting their professional careers. And then my living situation, I live in a home right now in South Boulder. I rent a small basement room. Actually, it's interesting. There are multiple bedrooms in this house that sit empty because there are already 3 of us living in the house, but it's like a 5-bedroom home. So that definitely speaks to the rent occupancy issue. But yeah, I'm still just a renter here.
Oh, yeah. And your comments seem to really address that missing middle issue that has really been the focus of this board, or will continue to be the focus of this board. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, definitely. And I very much appreciate the work that you guys are continuing to do in this community.
Thank you. Does anybody from the board have any comment on Grace's presentation? Okay, thank you. And do we have any additional folks from the public who would like to address the board? Okay, apparently not. So we can go to and thank you again, Grace. We can go to the next item, matters from council. We'll be hearing a presentation from Kathleen King of Planning and Development Services on the 90% draft of the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan. So please take it away, Kathleen.
Hello, thank you so much. Kathleen King from Planning, and I am joined by my colleague, Jean Gatza, who's also from Planning and our engagement specialist on the project. So we have a presentation I'm going to run through tonight. I will give me a second and I'll just pop that up on my screen.
We're also joined by Eric Bratton. He's our intern that's been
Good.
helping with the plan too.
Hi, Jean.
Hi, greetings. Happy to be here.
Okay. See. Whoa, I just lost. There we go. Okay. Looks like it's working. All right. Can everyone see slides? Oof. Sorry, I'm getting having some technical difficulties all of a sudden.
Yeah, I'm seeing a black screen at the moment.
Okay.
Hi again, Kathleen.
All right, let me stop
There you
sharing.
go.
Try again.
Jean, while Kathleen is doing, can you talk a little bit about what's expected tonight of HAP, the 90% plan, and then the final plan and the difference? So the way it's characterized on the agenda, it's really focused on input tonight, whereas I assume the final recommended plan will be a recommendation from this board. Is that correct?
Did we lose Kathleen?
We might have lost Kathleen. I think I can answer that, or perhaps she's working to get the internet going on that. So while we're calling this the 90% draft, we're thinking that it's pretty close. This is our last engagement window to ask community members for any last revisions. So what this board is seeing is very likely very close to the final draft. I don't know that we had it on the schedule to be back with this board with the final. So I think we would love to get your feedback in terms of to be able to share that with the planning board and the council for their review on this.
Thank you. So the answer is input, not a recommendation.
I think the input from this board can take whatever form the board chooses. I know that we had a really positive conversation last fall, and we've rounded out a lot of the pieces that I think were raised by members of this board.
Just to be clear, you won't be coming back to HAB for to request a specific recommendation. This is their opportunity to provide input.
That's correct. Thanks, Jay.
So yeah, Michael, I think it's up to you guys, how you want to approach it then. If you want to just provide feedback or if you want to make a formal recommendation.
We'll talk about it after the presentation.
I still see a black screen. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We just tested it before the meeting and things were working. I wonder.
Kathleen, maybe you should, maybe if you turn your camera off, it might give it a little more. Now I'm seeing it.
Now,
Okay.
okay.
It's
There.
coming.
It's going in and out on my end. I'm really sorry. Let me let me turn off my camera, and I might have to have maybe Jay or Jean do a share screen.
You might consider putting in a presentation mode before you share the screen, because I think it's possible that it's creating a new screen when you go to presentation mode from here.
Okay.
But
Let's give that a whirl.
I'll work on pulling it up.
Philip, you're a great addition already.
that remains to be seen, I think, even still.
All right, let's see. Okay, are you seeing slides now?
Worked. Excellent. Thank
It
you.
worked. Hooray, whoever offered that suggestion, thank you so much. Are you?
Go ahead.
Okay. And you're seeing a full screen, not, you don't see yourselves?
Seeing the full screen.
Correct.
Okay, whew. All right, we got it. Thanks, everybody. I'm really excited to be here with you tonight and share the draft East Boulder Subcommunity Plan and hear the feedback on the plan. As was mentioned, my name is Kathleen King, and I'm the project manager for the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan. So the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan is only the second plan of this scale that the city's ever done. The last subcommunity plan was the North Boulder Plan, which was completed in the 90s. We are still working on implementation of recommendations in the North Boulder Subcommunity Plan. So things like the North Boulder Library and upgrades to North Broadway, those are some examples of projects that were included in that plan that we're still working on. So we would expect a similar timeline for implementation of the East Boulder Plan and anticipate that change in this area will happen gradually over the next 20 years. Subcommunity plans are part of the city's suite of tools to help us implement the broad goals of the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan at the neighborhood level. Once a subcommunity plan is adopted, it will help guide changes to development standards and zoning and inform planning and funding of our capital improvement program for years to come. This project's been going on for 3 years. So we kicked off the planning process back in 2019 and went through a series of tasks. First, conducting an inventory and an analysis to really understand what the existing conditions of the subcommunity are, and then coming up with ideas for potential changes to the area, testing the outcomes of those changes, and developing strategies for future implementation. Today, we're nearing completion of the plan and looking for community feedback to help refine recommendations and complete the project. We've had excellent participation by the community throughout the process. Over 23 different engagement events and opportunities have taken place over the last 3 years. The process has also been guided by a working group of 21 community members who have met 30 times over the last 3 years to help shape recommendations of the plan and communicate the project out to the community. Today, we're still hoping to get more feedback on recommendations. There's a community questionnaire on beheardboulder.org that will be available through April 4th for community members to continue to submit feedback on this plan. So let's get into the actual plan. For those that are new to the project, the East Boulder subcommunity is located north of Arapahoe and east of Foothills Parkway and includes some key community assets like Belmont City Park and Boulder Community Health Foothills Campus, along with a lot of light industrial businesses and some office parks. We've seen some recent change in the area, and our charge with this project was to create a plan with the community to help manage that change and deliver outcomes that are important to Boulder. The vision for East Boulder is to evolve into a thriving industrial area with interesting places to work, live, play, and do business. This will be achieved by integrating diverse housing and retail options into existing industrial areas. New connections, enhancements to our current transportation network, and other mobility improvements will make getting around without a car much easier. We've heard strong support from community members for 15-minute walkable neighborhoods. The plan accomplishes this with key land use changes that will allow for a better mix of uses, including housing. We've heard some people are concerned about increased traffic congestion. The plan outlines different strategies to manage future demand on roadways in East Boulder. And we've heard that the plan should provide details about how all of this will happen. The plan also includes an implementation section where policies, projects, and programs offer a path to realization of the plan's vision over the next several years. So there's 4 major components of the East Boulder plan. There's a land use plan, a connections plan, a recommendation section outlining those policies, programs, and projects I mentioned, and then finally the 55th and Arapahoe Station Area Plan. This document offers more detailed recommendations for one of the key areas of change in East Boulder. I'm going to walk through the different sections of the plan to give you a sense of what can be found and where you might look for some key topics of interest. So we'll start with the land use plan. The recommendations for land use includes changes to the current BVCP land use map. Approximately 250 acres that are currently designated as light industrial are proposed to change to mixed-use neighborhoods. This modification will bring new opportunities for integrating residential, commercial, and retail spaces and places with existing sub-community businesses and workplaces. The plan also makes some modifications that will better align the BVCP land use map with existing conditions, protecting small business space through community industrial designations and identifying important natural areas and wetlands with environmental preservation designations. This section of the plan also looks at each of the proposed areas of change to describe how these areas might evolve in the future and what some key features of each neighborhood might include. One such area is the San Lazaro mobile home community. The plan recommends annexation of this site into the city. This community includes 213 homes and approximately 500 people live in the area. The land use map describes a lot of changes to mixed use neighborhoods, but it was really important to many of the community members and our working group that we provide additional guidance on what those neighborhoods should include and what they look like. The place type section of the plan provides that additional guidance and will help inform any future zoning changes we make to these areas. The next major component is the connections plan. So today, East Boulder is an area that over the years has largely been designed for motor vehicles. Options to travel by any mode other than a vehicle are pretty limited. Dispersed patterns of development have grown up around the car, and street blocks are typically long and disconnected. As land uses change and infill and redevelopment bring a greater mix of jobs and housing to the area, the transportation network and the mobility options will evolve to support this transformation. Supporting the network of businesses and new residents that we describe includes some major recommendations that will contribute to our access and mobility goals. So this section of the plan identifies new connections that are intended to support land uses by improving access into and through these redevelopment areas, expanding the pedestrian and bicycle network in the subcommunity, and creating opportunities for street activation and vibrancy in evolving neighborhoods. New connections described in the plan will be incorporated into the city's transportation master plan and replace portions of earlier network plans that cover East Boulder. Transportation improvements included in the connections plan will be installed by property owners as part of redevelopment, as well as through city projects. Another component of the transportation chapter is what we refer to as system enhancements. So these are transportation network improvements that are recommended for consideration in the next TMP update to improve existing facilities for all modes of travel. The enhancements range in scale from completing missing sidewalks to initiating design of the 55th Street corridor to incorporate protected bicycle facilities. The last tool in the connections plan section identifies projects for future study. So these are areas that may be located outside areas of change in East Boulder, but have been identified by community members through the engagement process and city staff as potential projects warranting further study for future consideration or investment. So following adoption of the subcommunity plan, these projects should really be tracked to determine when and how they're incorporated into future city departments' work plans. For example, preliminary engineering for East Arapahoe is a project that CDOT is initiating this year, while the potential for a Fast Tracks Northwest Rail Station at 55th Street is something we've heard as a desire from our community and which we will continue to examine as rail discussions with RTD proceed. The next piece of the plan outlines recommendations for policies, programs, and projects that will help implement each of our plan's goals for access and mobility, arts and culture, design quality and placemaking, housing affordability and diversity, resilience and climate commitment, and local business. So the recommended policies are described first. And for housing, some of the policies to highlight include supporting the development of new housing in strategic locations through land use and zoning updates in East Boulder, supporting the development of a diversity of attached housing types and missing middle types, incentivizing the development of affordable housing, and supporting mixed-use redevelopment to provide future residents with access to local amenities and services and jobs. The plan also outlines potential programs and projects, key steps towards implementation, and offers some guidance and prioritization. This tool will be used by city staff to develop future work plans, capital improvement planning, and develop partnerships throughout the community to implement these recommendations. Some key recommendations from this section include creating a form-based code for areas of change in East Boulder to help produce redevelopment that would create a diversity in housing types and forms, and the expansion of the community benefit program to offer a menu of incentives that would encourage private development to provide low and moderate income housing, as well as market rate middle income housing options as part of new residential and mixed use projects. So the final major component of the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan is the 55th and Arapahoe Station Area Plan. So this is an additional document that provides greater detail for recommendations in this area of change. There's a regional mobility hub planned for 55th and Arapahoe, and this will be served by high quality, high frequency bus rapid transit in the future as part of the State Highway 7 BRT project that the city has been working on in collaboration with CDOT, RTD, and our neighboring communities. The station area plan provides site-specific guidance on redevelopment strategies, key connections, and mobility improvements, and the creation of a district to manage parking, among other needs in the area. The plan provides guidance on redevelopment strategies, new and enhanced connections, and similarly offers an implementation matrix to help prioritize projects and realize the vision for this catalytic site. So I ran through a lot of that and those are really the major components of the plan, but I thought it was valuable to share with this group what some of the anticipated impacts would be on housing in the area. So based on the recommendations for land use and place types, these changes could allow for approximately 5,000 homes. We would anticipate about a quarter of those to be affordable. Taking a look at how that compares to what we might expect without these changes, It's a significant improvement in the number of housing units that the area could offer and the population that could be accommodated. This increases the total number of housing units in the city by 11% and the total number of affordable units by 32%. So right now we're in the middle of our current engagement window on the draft plan, and we're collecting feedback from the community and boards through April 4th. We'll be sharing that feedback with City Council on April 12th and asking for direction on final updates to the plan. Then we're going to work through those changes and finalize the East Boulder plan, as well as the 55th and Arapahoe Station Area plan. And then there's a joint public hearing scheduled with Planning Board and City Council on May 3rd. And then Planning Board will consider approval on May 5th and City Council on May 10th. So both of those bodies must adopt the plan for adoption. So tonight we have two main questions for HAB. You know, we saw this group in the fall and really would like to hear from you. You know, have we sort of addressed your feedback and what we've collected through all the different events and community feedback from our 60% draft? Are you seeing that input show up in the plan, or are there additional changes that we need to make? And then, you know, if you want to get into the specific recommendations or any parts or pieces of the plan, it's great to have your thoughts and feedback on edits or revisions or updates that we should make to finalize this before it goes to Planning Board and Council for adoption. So, you know, I have the plans up and available, and we can kind of flip through it if you want to do it that way. But otherwise, really looking forward to folks' feedback, and thank you for your attention. And sorry about the screen share challenge, but I might stop sharing now and we can.
Well, we got through it thanks to the new kid.
Yeah, yeah, way to go.
So let's hear some feedback from the board. Again, I hope you've all read this in addition to that very good presentation. And you know, I think feedback about anything, not limited to those two questions, anything that jumped out at you while you were reviewing. Juliet.
Hey, thanks for that, Kathleen. It was great. Appreciate the overview. And I had a quick question for you on the statistic there of 1/4 of the 5,000 new homes you're anticipating. I wanted to clarify that those would be 5,000 new homes outside of the existing the existing housing stock.
It's 5,000 total. So that would include the 213 homes that are in the San Lazaro mobile home community, as well as I think 70 that are at the Velo project, which is up near the airport, and maybe around 300 for the Waterview project. I probably have that info.
Yeah.
Easily accessible, but it includes, you know, projects under construction as well.
So I was just curious, when you mentioned about 1/4 of those homes would be affordable. Can you share the breakdown, if you know it, between rent and for purchase deed restricted homes?
Yeah, we assume 1/4 as affordable because of our 25% requirement for new development. So that's the quick math on that, and that we don't have it broken down by for rent versus ownership.
Thank you. I think that would be something. I don't know if there's a way to address that in the plan, or if the plan's not the place for that. But I know, for example, for our speaker who joined us earlier, one of her concerns is raising a family or moving through life stages in the community and wanting to be part of the home, but be part of the community long term. And a lot of times, and she referenced home ownership, people who arrived here earlier and had the benefit of being able to access home for purchase. So I think that's something that we've heard. I think our board has heard a lot. People are interested in deed restricted homes for purchase, not just rental affordable units.
And I'll jump in just a little bit. And Julie, I definitely
Thank
appreciate
you.
your thought and concern. The big challenge is that we can't control the market in terms of what gets built of ownership versus rental. And as we talked about last summer, you know, the market has been producing predominantly rental housing since the Great Recession. We got lots of home ownership when we first started this program back in 2000. And even back then, you know, council was concerned that we were getting too much ownership and not enough rental. So, you know, the market shifts back and forth. But the challenge here, we've definitely heard that through the community engagement, but we don't really have a great tool to require developers to build ownership. And I would just add 25%, I think, is very conservative. So if you remember the analysis that we did of affordable housing production over the past 5 years, we're really actually through preservation and new construction, we're getting closer to 36% of new housing units as permanently affordable. So just keep that in mind. But again, it's sort of 25 is sort of easily explained and justified.
Thank you.
More questions?
I have one question for Kathleen. About the community benefit program, what's an example of an incentive for developers to create more affordable housing?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, Jay and I and the city attorney's office, I think, have batted around different tax incentives, different ways to get projects through the development review process quicker. And putting together that package or menu of incentives is going to be really challenging. There's certainly a lot of legal barriers to that, but I think that's a big part of a next step for this project is working our way through what incentives are really possible and what would be most attractive to private development to move some of this further along.
Awesome, thank you.
And can I add on to, sorry.
Yeah, for sure.
The community benefit ordinance that was passed by council a couple of years ago now. So Julian, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but basically that applies citywide now. So any new project, commercial or residential, they are eligible to request additional heights or development intensity. But in exchange, they have to provide a higher percentage of permanently affordable units. So they can do that either providing that on site or providing the cash. So that's sort of the example of the community benefit. So the city is conferring additional development potential and value to that property. And in exchange, the community benefit we expect in return is additional affordable housing.
More questions? Yep, go for it.
Sorry, I was looking for the raise hand. Thank you for a great presentation. I am a brand new member of the board and I haven't read through the entire plan in detail. I've skimmed it and I'm familiar with it. I've skimmed it in the past too. I'm really excited about it on the balance, and I don't want to bring up a bunch of things that came to mind just because I'm a latecomer. I just really want to acknowledge that a lot of people have put a lot of thought into this, and I don't really want to put things up. And my questions are really not so much geared towards the key questions that you were hoping for responses for. I'm not sure I have much to say about the difference between the 60% plan and the 90% plan. But is it okay for me to just ask kind of like some of the questions that came to mind as you were presenting? Is that what this is for? One question I have is just related to HOAs. If there's any guidance in the plan related to that at all.
There's no guidance related to HOAs, but, and I don't know if this is part of your question, there is a recommendation for the creation of a general improvement district. And this is more transportation oriented, but part of that would help to manage parking, contribute to sort of area beautification, and then we would work to get that improvement district access to things like an eco pass. So folks that would live in that area could have an eco pass.
Is the expectation that most of these developments will be under HOAs? Is that, or is that even not even like addressed by the plan?
No, we don't really address HOAs.
Okay.
But I'm super curious about why you asked that question, and is there something about HOAs that is a positive for a neighborhood or a negative for a neighborhood? Because that would help me kind of think about.
Well, I think the reason I ask it is because when people talk about housing destroying the character of Boulder, one of the things I think about is like, well, some of the things that are really interesting about Boulder are, people use the word quirky, for example. That I don't know why that seems to be a buzzword that people like to use to talk about housing in Boulder. I like a diversity of housing, and I like people to be able to express themselves. And HOAs, when I go to suburbia, and I see houses that are all the same, and they're every last detail. It's like this voluntary system of micromanaging our neighbors is implemented. To me, it creates. You talked about placemaking, and one of the things to me that destroys placemaking is trying to make everything as sterile and as uniform as possible. And so for me, HOAs on the balance tend to have a negative connotation for me. And I would love to see the new housing in the new neighborhood to be quirky and to have character and to have interesting places to see, interesting murals and design. So that's why I bring it up.
That's great. That's super helpful. And I just would point out to the arts and culture section of the plan recommends expansion of the neighborhood mural program to this area of the city. So that's something that we're working on with our colleagues in arts and culture.
Can I add on again? I'll stop interrupting eventually, but so I think also the recommendation to create a form-based code for this, I think we'll get at a lot of what you're talking about, Philip. So the form-based code has a lot more flexibility in terms of design and creating interesting spaces and making sure that the architecture relates to the pedestrian as opposed to the automobile going down the middle of the street. It doesn't really get into, there's still buildings are probably still going to be managed by a company, and they're going to want to keep it clean and antiseptic, but that's just another thing to keep in mind. That's all.
Thanks, Jay. There's some other issues at HOAs, but we won't get into that right now. But Jacques has his hand raised.
Yeah, first of all, Philip, I appreciate your kind of concern with the HOA, and I would imagine that many of these structures or many of the developments that occur out there will, by needs, have an HOA of some sort. So I think that's really relevant to consider how those impact the kind of sense of community, both positive and negatives of that. The thing I was going to ask about is on the, Kathleen, on the community, or on the incentives and the things, the numbers that are in place here, the 5,000 or so, is that an assumption without incentives impacting that number? In other words, or are you saying, oh, if we provide certain incentives, we may get this much of a boost? Or I would imagine you're leaving that out. I was just curious if that's kind of in the calculus at all.
No, it does not incorporate like how the incentives might impact. We look at the whole area on a conceptual level and then have modeled out based on recommendations for place types, the different types of building formats and how many units we might get out of those spaces on a parcel by parcel basis. So that's it considers sort of maximum build out under this concept, but I do think we would want those incentives in order to get some of that, because what we learned, we did a market study maybe 2 years ago, and what we learned is a lot of these spaces in East Boulder are operating great and making money today. And so there's today no great incentive for a property owner to convert this to housing in East Boulder. So having those incentives as a way to sort of trigger people to take advantage of that and increase their value, that's really the driving force behind why we would want to incentivize redevelopment. That includes housing and affordable housing in particular in the area.
Okay, and then you had mentioned, if I heard you correctly, that part of kind of next steps would be to engage somehow with that community benefit component. Are there thoughts of, in addition to the community benefit pieces that we've already put in place recently, are there thoughts of other suggestions, particularly for the East Boulder area subcommunity, or that just hasn't been discussed yet? In other words,
do you mean outside of the community benefit program?
Outside of the community benefit program, yeah.
So what, the community benefit program is already has this existing structure, and we're hoping to build on that and expand it. We haven't recommended in this plan incentives that would be outside of that program, but if that is, a recommendation that this board is interested in seeing, we can certainly take that to planning board and council and get their feedback and thoughts on that as well.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. I guess I was just, the numbers sound pretty good. When we look at, total number of units that are going to be potential here and the percentage of the entire housing stock and how that will impact it. And I was curious to see if there had been any consideration of saying, oh, specifically for this area, maybe these are incentives that don't exist now that might be helpful down the road, or if that's, if that'll be a part of it. But it sounds like that hasn't been part of that discussion yet. So maybe something the board could look into if that was, I don't know how getting into the weeds that is with city council having already just done this community benefit piece, but.
Well, I know to do a program that's East Boulder specific, I know Jay and I have talked about that in the past, and I don't want to misquote you, Jay, but I think, the idea that affordable housing is appropriate everywhere in the city. So why would we create a program just for this part of the city? It is part of the thinking behind using our existing community benefit program to create those incentives so that they could apply citywide also.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Philip, did you have your hand up? I'm sorry, I lost internet for a second there.
I did too, actually. I haven't been to any of these meetings yet, much less participated in one. So I'm not sure how much to to rattle on, or how, like how arcane I should get. So someone rein me in if I'm going down a list of things that are super relevant. One thing I'm curious about is you never mentioned the Boulder Valley School District. Do they own property in East Boulder? I guess, I mean, I know they have the two high schools a bit further east, but I assume maybe there's some planning and anticipation that they might need schools if there's a bunch of people start moving into that area.
Yeah, so the school district owns some sites that are just outside the boundaries off of Arapahoe, on the south side of Arapahoe. But we have shared our projections for new housing and new population for the area with the school district to make sure that they can either accommodate, or if we need to build a new school, we obviously need to know that. So the feedback that we got from the school district is that they would be able to accommodate this population with the existing schools. And part of that is just the trend in declining number of students in the city in general. But yes, the school district can accommodate the new housing in East Boulder. So that's great.
That concerns me a little bit, because one of the nice things about a 15-minute neighborhood is that kids can walk to schools. And I'm not sure where they would walk to schools from 55th and Arapahoe unless they were in high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a presentation to have just last fall by the school district. It was rather sobering, depressing, actually.
Just the decline in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and we can share that information with you too.
I think I've seen it, if that's the same presentation by Ralph Frid at the District Accountability BVSD. I don't know who was the speaker.
Glenn Segru, who's the district planner.
Okay.
Yeah. For those who weren't there, as I recall, the number of the decline is 1,600 students roughly, and that's basically during the COVID period. Does that sound right? And you know, that's a real acceleration from a slow decline of 1 or 2% a year. So some of our board members expressed concern about the housing issue being linked to declining school enrollment. That's obviously a very legitimate concern, and maybe bringing more families into this area is a way of addressing that concern in some way or form.
Yeah, it seems like, you know, if they're going to close Flatirons Elementary School up in the Chautauqua area or Flagstaff neighborhood, that having more families move into East Boulder subcommunity doesn't really help that. But
well, what we learned from that session was, again, this is from recollection, is that the only real growth in school enrollment is in East County schools. So perhaps bringing more students who actually live in Boulder would be a positive step. And I don't know if that'll save any school that's potentially on the block or not, but it might be a way of reversing the citywide, not reversing, but addressing the citywide enrollment trend that we're experiencing now. Anyone else have any questions or comments? I have a few, if not. Okay, thank you all. Again, these are not strictly related to the questions you wrote from the screen, Kathleen, but this is really about 15-minute neighborhoods. I think that's a wonderful goal. And of course, the previous subcommunity plan was for NOBO, which has had a lot of positive, many would view positive developments. The Holiday neighborhood, the emergence of an arts district would be 2 examples of that. But what it hasn't done yet is created that 15-minute neighborhood. It's not a full service walkable neighborhood. So my question would be, what are your lessons learned from NOBO that you might apply to this plan before it goes into its final form?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I know that a big component of that is getting retail in the area and getting the right types of retail in the area. So one of the recommendations in the plan talks about cultivating that type of retail and working with our community vitality department to really curate some of those uses, not just providing space for those types of uses through zoning, but really being active in attracting certain retailers and specifically grocery retailer. So grocery is something we've heard over and over from community members in this area that live near the subcommunity, is that that's something that is really needed to create a more walkable neighborhood in that area. And our partners in community vitality have reached out to a number of different grocers who, you know, their response is, sure, there's no other grocery store in the area to compete with, but you don't have the population in East Boulder to justify having that type of retail. And so, you know, kind of working back and forth on the balance for that, the first thing is providing the type of space, and we can do that through zoning, but then we really are realizing that we have to play a more active role in communicating with and attracting the types of retailers that we're looking for.
Mhm.
And then I think the other piece of it is this plan is pretty strategic in I think the mixed use neighborhoods of describing both a horizontal and vertical mix of uses. So in North Boulder, I think there's probably larger swaths of area that are just residential. And in this area, we're anticipating a lot more vertical mixed use. So residential on top of ground floors that may have more active uses for retail services and these things like light industrial. So really trying to better pair those types of uses is part of this plan.
And would you describe that as potentially a flat out recruitment effort to find the right retailers that would serve the neighborhood?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a major next step as redevelopment occurs, is playing a more active role in that.
Great. And then it was interesting looking at this plan again. I felt like I was reading it for the first time after a few months. And it's, you know, it's really well done. The goals are admirable. I really appreciate the fairly thorough section on arts and culture. I think that's a really important part of our community. I was wondering could you quickly review the part that concerns me is the implementation part. So if you look at like the good outcome of the holiday neighborhood in North Boulder, you had the city basically own the land and controlled it, which is not the situation in East Boulder. So two things I ask is, one is, what are the key points of the implementation plan for review? And then the second would be, in addition to all the wonderful outreach you've done with neighborhoods, have you done a focus group with property owners to kind of get their input on what would it take to really incentivize them to start tweaking or even drastically changing some of their land uses through redevelopment?
Yeah, those are great questions. I think, yeah, this is very different from North Boulder, and a big challenge of implementation of this will be, I think both assemblage of parcels. There's not one major large property owner in the area that we can depend on to make these big transformations. We know that they will happen incrementally and over time. And so, really monitoring and keeping track of how those changes are happening on this parcel by parcel basis, and being able to match those with some capital improvements to continue to catalyze redevelopment in those areas is going to be really important. And then related to focus groups with property owners, we did do a focus group with property owners for the station area plan. We had a consultant come in and work with folks in that area specifically. But then we've had a couple of property owners in the area and property owner representatives in the area on our working group. And they've really been great, I think, at describing what the challenges are today and why we're not getting the types of redevelopment that we might hope for today. And so they've played a big role in kind of tweaking some of the language and a lot of the performance standards in those place types to help us kind of turn the key and get some of that change that we want to see unlocked and more attractive in the future.
Kathleen, I might add, we also did a session with
Yeah.
the Boulder Chamber with a lot of the business and property owners in the area, and heard a lot of willingness to for folks to help us again with the next turn when we get even more specific with the zoning and form-based code.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, we have about 10 minutes left on this agenda item. We can certainly spend more time because it's a really important one. I'd love to hear a couple of things. One is, we haven't exactly answered the questions posed, but if we provided some valuable input, that would be a question for Jean and Kathleen. Another one is, are we happy with doing input at this point as opposed to an actual recommendation, and which is not contemplated for tonight? But if we pass on that option, we still have time, given the schedule you mentioned, to weigh in a way that'll be meaningful to planning board and council.
Yes, I think that you've provided great feedback, and the conversation has initiated some ideas for myself, at least, about some changes that we might talk about with planning board and council. So that's really helpful. And then, yeah, folks can always reach out to myself if new ideas come up that you'd like to have considered for inclusion or a change to the plan. You can always reach out to me, certainly. And then as we go to planning board and council for adoption, I think maybe the second part of your question was about a recommendation. There's
what's
no
the best timing on that? We're probably not ready to do anything tonight anyway, but what, reasonably can we get that done to the next meeting in a way we'd still have some influence on the decision?
When is your next meeting, Jay?
Fourth Wednesday of the month.
Fourth Wednesday of the month. So April will be April 27th.
Yep,
Is
correct.
that right? Yeah, honestly, the timing on that would be great to get a recommendation, because we will go to planning board and city council with a joint hearing the following week. So it wouldn't go in their memo necessarily unless HAB chose to submit a letter. But we would share the recommendation at that joint meeting.
Great. And I had a question about San Lazaro. It's not really related to the plan, but just for the information of the board. There was a New York Times article on Sunday about investors buying mobile home parks and jacking up the rents. They actually use Sanssouci in Boulder as an example of a place that is where residents are threatened by that kind of scenario. I'm just wondering if that's considered a stable asset. Who owns it? Is there any threat to the continued occupation of that mobile home park for the people who are living there now?
So yes, it's a privately owned park. The designation and zoning would be for it to remain as manufactured housing moving forward. We've certainly heard that concern from a lot of the residents in the area. But through, part of the annexation process is a negotiation. And so we would really look for something like restricting price raises in pad rents as part of that annexation negotiation. And I don't know, Jay, if there's other tools or conversations around that particular project that have come up recently.
No, I just know they're still in conversations or discussions over that annexation agreement. But I would mention that the state is, there's legislation pending that would cap rent increases for mobile home parks throughout the state. So I would say that's something to keep track of as well.
Okay, so the preservation item is under discussion in any case, people are not ignoring it.
Correct, yes.
Okay, great. Any other comments for input, thoughts about whether we leave it at that and wait until the April meeting for a recommendation before we potentially move on? Okay, well, thank you, Kathleen and Jean, and we wish you luck again. I'm impressed with the quality of this plan. It's really nicely done, and congratulate you on that. And you know, it's a vision I think we can get behind, and I'd love to see it achieved. But we will talk about it again at our next meeting, unless anyone has any other comments on the matter at hand. Okay.
Quick question, Michael.
Sure.
I think for Kathleen and Jean, it would be probably most beneficial if they did not have to attend the next meeting. Do you think this is something that HAB can do without their presence, or?
Well, I assume we'll have another document to view, the 100% document, or will we be looking at 90% again?
The 100% document would be completed by that week. I don't know if it would be completed in time for how much earlier. Remind me, Jay, when your packet goes out before a meeting.
I mean, ideally a week before, but
A week before, okay.
Depending on what your timeline is. So I think as soon as you can get it, as soon as it's done, I'll share it with the.
Okay. That sounds good.
But yeah, so I think if you have the final document, hopefully, you know, if you do have comments, I would strongly encourage you to share those sooner rather than waiting till the 100% plan, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
At this point, I'd be comfortable considering a recommendation based on whatever we have on paper. Does anyone have any other feelings about that? So I guess you're free on April 27th, Jean and Kathleen.
Jean is not, but I will be here.
Can I interrupt for a second? I don't quite understand the subject of what's being talked about. To me, you're talking in code just a little bit. Can you just sort of spell out for me what the question is that you're asking, Michael?
I thought Jay was asking whether we needed the planning staff on board when we make a recommendation next month.
No, I mean even broader than that. You're talking about whether we're going to make a recommendation, and what is that, like a vote where we say we recommend?
Yes. Yeah. So in your agenda, there's a key to action steps, and I'm sorry, that's my dog barking. And input is just what we're doing. We're talking about it. The presenters are, I hope, taking notes. And recommendation is an action step. We vote on. You know, we obviously have to have a quorum. It would go to our other city leaders as an official HAB recommendation.
Thank you.
I guess my comment is I think we've provided some input, and that to me serves as a recommendation that you're talking about unanimously voting on the input, Michael,
No,
as a recommendation.
I think input is just what we did. We talked about it. We made some observations. I think we made some suggestions. When we make a recommendation, we have to have a motion. We have to have wording. It doesn't have to be unanimous. It just has to pass to serve as a recommendation from HAB. Is that correct, Jay?
And I just for process understanding, HAB is not required to make a recommendation for approval for this type of plan. The only approving bodies are planning board and city council, but I think it certainly goes a long way with planning board and council if HAB were to recommend one way or the other.
Yeah, I think it would behoove us to make a recommendation next month. It's a really important issue. 11% increase in the housing stock for Boulder over time, and certainly hope we will get to that point.
Juliet's comment made me think she had the same confusion as me, that a recommendation again is just us saying that we recommend this plan to the city council and to planning board. It's not, it has nothing to do with us making recommendations to Kathleen and Jean and other.
Right.
planners. Yeah.
We're doing input is what we're presenting to Kathleen and Jean tonight.
Yeah.
Recommendation, as I understand it, because we haven't made that many, it wouldn't just be a yes or no. It could be, yes, we like this plan with the following, changes, which is something we can talk about at the next meeting. So it doesn't have to be as cut and dried as yes or no.
Okay, thank you.
And I apologize. I think I was the one who murked it up.
Right. But just to reiterate, the preference would be to not put conditions on your approval next month, because it's going to be very difficult for staff to change the plan. So if you have it, it would be great to share that in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
Makes sense?
Can we move on to our next agenda item?
Can I ask one more clarifying question?
Sure.
Kathleen said that we could reach out to her with ideas and suggestions, which seems lovely. I can imagine writing a long email of all these other things I didn't mention, perhaps. But as a HAB, as a body, do we make inputs together as something we would send to Kathleen in the next couple of weeks? I mean, how does that work? Sorry if that's too much process questions.
That's a good question, because I haven't really done that. What do you think, Jay?
Yeah, I mean, so basically your input is just like any member of the community. So, I mean, staff takes it all seriously. But no, you would not be speaking for the full board. Similarly, when someone makes a comment during a discussion like this, it doesn't mean that's representing all of HAB. If all of HAB, says, yeah, we think that's a great idea, we support that, that does carry more weight. But no, you should definitely feel free to share with what you have with Kathleen, and she'll respond in terms of what she thinks is appropriate to incorporate and what isn't. Does that help, Phil?
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I'm understanding your question, Philip, I think it would be difficult for us to coordinate comments outside of these meetings because of sunshine laws and
right. That's kind of why I asked, is because if someone it was raised that we could do input in the next couple of weeks, which doesn't really make sense to me unless we're just giving her feedback as individuals.
And it sounds like that's what we'd be doing.
Yeah, right. I'm the new guy. I'm just asking questions.
This is good. No, I like it. Okay. Any other questions before we actually go on to the next agenda item? We're still pretty much on schedule.
I just kind of related to Philip's question. if you can, if you have ideas and you want to send them my way, it helps me a lot if you submit those comments to me by April 4th, because that's when we're sort of gathering all of the input that we get from this engagement window and sharing that out to City Council. Thanks.
Thank you. Before we move on, we had another board member join us, Jennifer Livovich.
Hello.
She mentioned she was had another engagement and couldn't be here at the opening, but welcome to our meeting, Jen.
Yeah, I apologize
And,
for being late. Thank you.
Okay. Next item. No, I have unstable internet. Is I'm sorry, my packet disappeared for a second there. Matters from the board. Item 7, Part A. We're going to get an update for input on the Department of Housing and Human Services strategic planning. And we have Wendy Schwartz and Jay Zugnet from HSS here to make that presentation.
Yep, so I'm gonna, I'll show the PowerPoint, but Wendy is gonna basically lead the show, and then I'll also help take notes and also help answer any questions that you might have. So I think this is gonna be really interesting for the group, because I think it helps will help you understand a little bit better what Housing and Human Services does. Because it makes you think about our activities, our services, and what we hope to accomplish a bit differently. So with that, I'll let Wendy introduce herself and take it away.
Hello, Housing Advisory Board members. It's great to be here tonight. My name is Wendy Schwartz. Some of you I've met before and know, and for some of you, I think we're new to each other. So I am the Human Services Policy Manager in our city's Department of Housing and Human Services. And I've been working with Jay and some of our other team members on the Housing and Human Services Strategic Planning and Evaluation Framework that I'm going to present tonight. And so with that, I will I'm going to back up for a minute and just kind of repeat one thing that Jay said at the beginning, which is we really started this project as a way to better encapsulate. Is everybody getting feedback, or is that just me?
Maybe everyone could mute. If everyone could mute, except for Wendy, that would help.
Okay, that is better. So whatever was happening, it seemed like that that helps to solve the problem. So we really were looking for a good way to help us refine and encapsulate our work, both for our staff and as we communicate with community partners, community members, our boards and commissions like you folks. And so that's what we'll be going through tonight, is really how do we get to the heart of the matter on what HHS does and what we're hoping the outcomes will be of our efforts in the department. And so with that, we can go to the next slide. So this is just a brief overview. Of course, HAB isn't our only advisory group to the department. So we are talking about this framework and these draft ideas with our other boards and commissions that you can see here on the screen. Next slide. And I think that in this group and in most groups we present this information to, there's really a range of expertise, usually with how much work folks have done on strategic planning. And so a lot of people are really familiar with it and some people are less familiar with it. But really the goal here is to find the best way to fulfill our mission to have equitable and wise use of our resources, and to have a way to evaluate our community impact. Next slide, please. And the reason that we embarked on this project, why do we need a strategic framework for HHS? Some of you might remember that just a few years ago in the city structure, housing was a division, and it was completely separate and in a separate department from our Department of Human Services. And so when we consolidated into Housing and Human Services a few years ago, both of those previous separate entities had a set of goals and a set of plans in place. But one of our goals in doing this project was to really make sure we were knitting those goals of the previously former entities together, and focus on what they mean and what would it look like if we were succeeding in our goals, with the idea that we'll be informing down the road a future more formal HHS strategic plan. So the process that we went through to get started on creating this framework was really looking at the cross-cutting themes of the Human Services Strategy, which was a document the former Human Services Department had, our housing goals, and a lot of really consistent feedback we get from the community, from nonprofits we work with, from our partners. And we really called these the what keeps people up at night issues. Right. And it was really what are the most common themes and the core, the root of the issues that people bring up about why they might have a hard time thriving in the city of Boulder. And so those two big umbrella areas that we're going to talk about in our framework tonight, one is affordability and one is inclusivity. Next slide, please. This one, I don't think I need to go through the whole slide. I think this board is probably pretty familiar with a lot of the broader city plans and frameworks that we need to, in departments, incorporate into any work we do. And so there's a number of them on this particular slide. I'll call out the racial equity plan. Those are things that we have to consider when we're putting together a strategic framework for the department. Next slide, please. This is our Housing and Human Services Department mission statement. And I won't read the whole thing, but the first sentence I think is our shorthand that we use for our mission, which is we strive for all to thrive, and all Boulder community members deserve to thrive. And so that's another grounding point that we used in this process. Next slide, please. Internally, a lot, we've talked about this as the logic model project, and that's because the format that we've used for setting up this, this strategic framework is something that, again, you know, usually in most groups that we talk to like this, some people are very familiar with a logic model and what it is, and some people are not familiar at all. And so I'll briefly explain this. But really, it's an attempt to visually convey the relationship between what we do and how we do it and the results we want from those actions. So that's a shorthand. Next slide, please. So we have an example, and Jay, I don't know. Oh, that just took a little while to come up, I guess. A logic model from a more individual level problem that we use in a logic model, but that really boils down to what's the problem that needs to be solved, and what do we have the ability to influence or change. Next slide, please. And so, so in this more personal problem of like plantar fasciitis, or something that I think a lot of people in Boulder with all of our athletes have experienced, There's a goal, which is I've got this foot problem and I want to get better to get back to my activities. And there's a long-term outcome that of what you want to be able to do. And between your goal and your long-term outcome, and Jay, I'm not sure if the rest of this, you can go ahead and bring the rest of the logic model up if it's in steps. There's the inputs, what are the resources that you have available to you to try and address the problem? What are the activities? So what do you do with those resources to try and address the problem? There's some outputs, like for instance, in this case, it might be how much time do you spend stretching or doing physical therapy, for instance. And then there's short-term outcomes, signs that you're getting better, and then long-term outcomes, which are your final goal. So we've applied this then to our department work. And what we're starting with here is looking at the affordability portion of the logic model. And I believe you folks also have copies of both the affordability logic model and the inclusivity logic model that were sent to you as part of the meeting materials. So if it's hard to look at stuff like this on the screen, you can also reference those copies. But to walk through what this looked like for our department, I'll stop here a minute and say, you know, when we get input from people about the things that keep them from thriving in Boulder, a lot of the input we get really boils down to affordability of things that people need to live a decent life in the city. And of course, I'm sure you can imagine one of the top things that comes up almost right away for everybody is affordability of housing. But when people talk about other things like, you know, access to medical care or transportation, there's a root underneath that of affordability too. And so that's why we've framed this affordability, this draft goal, as diverse households can afford to live and thrive in Boulder. And so similar to our example logic model with the foot problem, we have our inputs here. What resources does HHS have to put toward problems of affordability in Boulder? And I won't read every bullet, but at the end of the day, we have staff time, funding, infrastructure, and other types of program supports like technical assistance. Those are the resources, the inputs that we can use to address affordability in Boulder. We have activities. So how do we use those resources to address the problem? And again, I won't read every single bullet and sub-bullet here, but what this boils down to is either us directly providing some services in the community, or in other cases, providing funding or support to community nonprofits or other community partners in order to provide services and support in a variety of housing and human services areas in the community. I think we can go to the next part of the logic model, Jay.
Yeah, Wendy, can we just pause and make sure that there are no questions? I just want to make sure everybody's following along.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You guys are following this interesting so far? Fantastic. All right, keep going, Wendy.
Okay, so when we do those activities that are essentially either providing direct services or providing funding or support for other people to provide those services in the community, then we have a set of outputs. And so I'll just pick an example here. The top bullet kind of in the right-hand column, one example of an output is the number of rental subsidies that we have distributed in our department, right? So that works toward goals of affordability, but an output is not the same as an outcome. And that's because there might be reasons why rental subsidies don't solve the problem for some people. And so then we go to the next step beyond outputs to outcomes. And is that coming up? Oh, there it went. Okay. So we've divided, similar to our example, our desired outcomes into short term. So this year and the next couple of years, intermediate term, which is 2025 through 2027 roughly, and then long term, 2028 through 2030. And that's because for most really complex problems in a community, right, you're not going to see change that it equals your ultimate goal overnight, right? And so you have to have kind of some benchmarks to look at how you might be making progress in the short term, with the hopes that those progress to the long-term outcomes that you want. And so in this example, the example I'll pull out of these outcomes to highlight just the short, intermediate, and long term, since this is the Housing Advisory Board, I'll look about, 3/4 of the way down the outcome columns to where it says housing. And so you can see in the short-term column under housing, some of the short-term outcomes that we would hope for would be increased percentage of homes that are permanently affordable, reduced percentage of Boulder residents who experience foreclosure or eviction, and increased transition from homelessness to housing. And then if you move over to the next column in the intermediate term under the housing category, we would have the outcomes of reduced percentage of Boulder residents who report housing insecurity as a significant barrier, reduced returns to homelessness, and reduced percentage of households cost burdened by housing. And then finally, if we go over to the long-term outcomes, we have related goals there for reduced homelessness, including reduced recurrence and longevity of individual and family homelessness. And for more details on what that looks like, we reference Housing Homeless Solutions for Boulder County. And then increased housing security, and that's also in our affordable housing goals. So that's kind of a high-level summary of how we've summarized how the department looks to address affordability issues. So this idea of diverse households being able to afford and to live and thrive in Boulder, and what we would hope for as outcomes in that area. And so I'm going to just pause for a minute, since we've been talking for a while, and ask if there's comments or questions on affordability before we go through the inclusivity logic model, which is similar but on a different subject. So I see, it looks like Jen, I thought I saw your hand go up first. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you as well. Yes, I do have a few questions. I'm curious, at the beginning of this, you threw out a scenario of a person who was typically a runner who was injured and what that would look like. I'm curious to know what other scenarios you may have used in the development of this plan, if there were any, what those look like. So that's my first question. And then in terms of the in the intermediate term here, you touched base on reducing the returns to homelessness. Is this referring to our current 25% churn rate for permanent supportive housing? I'm reading it as that to be the case, but maybe you're meaning it to mean something else.
So thanks, Jen, for those questions. So on your first question regarding kind of the running example, so to speak, we used that as a kind of a real world, regular person, not related to housing and human services work example, just because the thinking was that that's relatable as a problem in everyday life to people whereas, some people might not be that familiar with housing and human services work. And so when we talked about scenarios that went into developing this logic model, we looked at really the common issues and problems that are reported to us by community members, by our staff, by our partners, and that comes through a variety of mechanisms. That is everything from program reports to community meetings to the inputs we've gotten during past strategy projects. So is that helpful in answering your first question, Jen?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. And then your second question about reduced returns to homelessness. So one of the things about, and I should have said this earlier, about kind of a high level logic model in this is that it doesn't get as detailed, on this level as something like the homelessness strategy or the homeless solutions for Boulder County work. And so we would look for more details in the plans there. This is a high-level statement that would apply both to the permanent supportive housing issue that you raised, Jen, as well as to any folks that gain housing and then lose it for different reasons. And so in some cases, that might be folks who were housed in a different situation than permanent supportive housing. But it's an overall more global statement about really hoping that we would have fewer and fewer people returning to homelessness once they've been able to exit. Does that answer your second question?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just knew the percentages for PSH. There are multiple types of housing vouchers. But overall, I mean, this is referring to somebody who was homeless, exited homelessness, and then has cycled back as homeless as a result of loss of housing overall, regardless of what type of housing program they were placed with, right?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then it looks like Philip, you have a hand up.
Hi, yeah, I'm curious about the affordability goal, as it's stated at the top, is related to diversity. And I'm curious, do you make attempts to measure diversity somehow directly, or is that all just sort of implied by the different things that you have listed here? It seems like there'd be ways to talk about actually measuring diversity of populations along different characteristics that you might care about.
Yeah, and that's something, and I think we might have a better discussion on this after we go through the inclusivity logic model, because an interesting kind of conversation that our team had when we were working on these logic models is when we don't have, if we lack diversity in some ways, in what ways is that issue rooted? Oh,
Jay, can you mute? Jay, you need to mute.
Sorry.
In what way is that issue of when we lack diversity in the community rooted in affordability versus rooted in other factors that might impact how people feel included in the community? And so that's, I guess that's a long way of saying that we, at this stage of this work, in this format, we haven't defined like what are all the subsets or different types of people that we might consider in the community if we consider it diverse. But I think as we get further down the line and and eventually have a larger strategy document, we might get to that level of detail. Was that helpful?
I'm just going to keep listening for now. I don't quite understand your answer, but
okay. Well, How about we try this? How about we go through the inclusivity logic model, and then let's circle back and Jay and I can give a shot at restating.
Thank you.
Does that work for you? Okay. So then the next part of our logic model is an inclusivity goal. And our draft goal is worded as all Boulder residents feel safe, welcome, and included in social, civil, and economic life, regardless of personal identities or socioeconomic status, or excuse me, circumstances. And what I referenced when I was speaking a minute ago is, again, there's a lot of affordability-based reasons why we might not experience sometimes as much diversity in the community as we might like, but there might be reasons that aren't necessarily rooted in affordability. And so I won't go through the inputs again because they are essentially the same as the other logic model. Activities in this case, in terms of things that HHS can do with the resources we have toward the goal of inclusivity, are under the broad categories of public engagement, policy and procedure enforcement, and adaptation, citywide and department equity and inclusion work, and community safety and belonging. And then Jay, should we go out onto the outputs? So the outputs, and I'll just pick a couple of examples here. So there's one, for instance, at the top on the left-hand side, the number of HHS staff participating in or completed racial equity trainings. Or on the upper right-hand side, the rate of diversity by race, ethnicity, gender orientation, age, abilities on HHS boards, committees, and commissions. So those are some of the outputs we might look for from our efforts. And then let's go on to our draft outcomes. So again, exactly the same as the last logic model. We have short-term, intermediate term, and long-term goals. And so to pick out a few examples here, under the category of citywide and department equity activities, we would have short-term outcomes of increased cultural competency among HHS staff and increased knowledge about inclusive hiring practices, performance management among HHS managers and staff. Then in the intermediate outcomes for that same area, increased percentage of job postings that allow applicants to demonstrate qualification through lived experience rather than only through formal education or unpaid work. Increased utilization of inclusive performance management practices among HHS managers and staff, and additional outcomes from the racial equity plan. And then long-term outcomes, a few examples that relate to what I just said in the short term and intermediate term, for instance, would be increased diversity of personal identities among HHS staff and increased diversity of personal identities of HHS program leadership. So I'll stop there and see if, first of all, if Philip, if that helped at all with your previous question, to talk about how we're looking at inclusivity and diversity. And then I see that it looks like at least one other board member has a question here.
Thank you. This is useful. This is kind of, I guess I was sort of expecting some of this to be on the last slide. So it makes sense that this way.
Great. I'm glad that was.
If I could just jump in real quick. Yeah, that was the big challenge. You know, we tried to create a single logic model, but recognized that there was just too much going on. So that's why we created the two separate ones. But your question sort of made me think a little bit, Philip. So an example of the diversity piece that we can track, and you'll see this next month, we're going to review the housing dashboard. And in there, we track who lives in affordable housing and in terms of demographics. And we compare that to the citywide averages. And it's really interesting. So that tells us that that's one tool to get increased diversity in Boulder, is to provide more affordable housing options. Similarly with school enrollment, you know, that the number of school-age children in affordable housing homes in Boulder is significantly higher than Boulder as a whole. So that's just a couple examples, but there are others on the human services side in terms of how we provide grants, who we're serving, and being able to track that over time.
Those are great examples, Jay. Thanks for chiming in there. Jen?
Hi, thank you. Couple questions. Here under public engagement, you're talking about recruiting, facilitating, and manage advisory boards, commissions, and committees. You mentioned in another section of this that you will be including lived experience as opposed to higher learning requirements. So my question to you is public engagement. What strides are you taking to encourage people with lived experience to apply?
Yeah, and I think that is, when we look at, for instance, recent board and commission appointments, we really have tried, and this is a work in progress, right? It's not like, wow, we have these goals and now we're suddenly doing it perfectly for every aspect of this. But for example, really looking at how we can change issues like what's your first language, and is that a barrier to you in contributing to city decisions? And so we have a member of our Human Relations Commission now that is a Spanish first speaker. And so we really want to make sure that everything about the materials and the meetings is accessible for people who, in this case, want to be board members or commission members in the city, but might not have English as their first language. So I think really what our task is going to be in HHS, and this is, of course, part of the broader citywide umbrella, is thinking about what are all the types of experiences and voices that we would love to see on our boards and commissions, and particularly when there might be reasons why certain perspectives might be more impacted by one area or one problem. What would be the barrier to people with those backgrounds, those lived experiences participating, and how could we adjust our policies or the way we put out information about our boards and commissions? What are the application requirements? I think it is really a process of trying to discover those barriers and see where we can adjust what we're doing to knock some of the barriers down.
My last question is a follow-up to that. So in trying to determine some ways to remove barriers so that more people can be included in applying for such positions. And I want to share my experience with trying to apply for the Housing Advisory Board for the first time. I'm a relatively connected, a well-informed person within the city of Boulder, and it was a literal nightmare for me to just find the application page. So my question to you is for somebody that may not necessarily be as well versed with the computer or lacks stable internet, how are they going to apply? And also, how are they going to know about it? Because I only found out about it from someone I knew. And so that leads me to ask, are there plans to have working groups who can potentially help to identify some ways to make the current system better?
Yeah,
Thank you.
those are great questions. So just a little bit of a preface to my answer. The other challenge that we had with creating the logic models for housing and human services is that what do we influence versus not really influence. So we really tried to focus on what is housing and human services sphere. But I agree that there are challenges to the boards and commissions recruitment process. And there is a group, and I can put you in touch with Brenda Rittenauer. And she has really taken this on as a challenge to rethink about how boards and commissions are appointed. And I think the fact that City Council appointed 2 students this year shows that we are making progress. That's not something I've seen in my experience with the city. But as Wendy said, I think it's going to be unfortunately a bit of a slow, laborious process. But I would definitely want to put you in touch with Brenda. And then the other piece, it's not just boards and commissions, it's also city staff. How do we increase the diversity of our own staff? And one of the things in this work that's really helped me is that every time I post a position now, I am extremely careful to be clear that there isn't an education requirement. If you can satisfy the skills that we're looking for through lived experience, through work experience, we strongly consider that. So it's been a slow shift, but I've seen it start to happen at the city. And I just wanted to share some more concrete examples.
Thank you, and I'd appreciate that introduction. Thank you very much.
Hey, Jay, one thing you reminded me of while you were talking, another example of how we're just trying new things in the city to get at some of these issues is that before, when the recruitment process was happening, the citywide process for boards and commissions, one thing that the Human Relations Commission piloted this year was they did during the open application process, they did 2 community drop-in optional meetings for people that were basically like, hey, here's an opportunity to talk about what the Human Relations Commission is. And they were 2 Zoom meetings. One was in English and one was in Spanish. And so people did have the opportunity to really get online and talk about what the board was about and get questions answered. And so that was a new thing we tried. And again, I do think that helped us, especially get some interest from people who, in this case, might not have had English as their primary language. And I realize that doesn't get to the very real technology issue you just raised, Jen, but it's just another example of something new we tried this year to address some of these issues. It looks like, Philip, do you have another question? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I did such a good job of lowering my hand before I started talking. And the icons. When people criticize Boulder for its lack of diversity or its exclusionary policies and whatnot, there's kind of an elephant in the room that feels like it's not being addressed by this inclusivity goal, where it talks about all Boulder residents feeling safe and welcome and included. Because a huge part of inclusivity has to do with people that have been excluded from Boulder, and the affordability effects, for as one example on our diversity. And you actually just sort of implicitly alluded to it when you were talking about job applicants. And, you know, one major group of people that's left out of this statement is people who work in Boulder, right? And often they feel excluded in ways that are really profound and should be addressed because they can't afford to live here, even though they work here. And that doesn't really encompass all the people who might be in Boulder's orbit of influence. But I just thought I'd mention that. I don't know if that's maybe outside the charter of what HHS is allowed to consider, but to just talk about only residents seems to be kind of missing a critical point of the diversity and inclusion problem that we have in Boulder.
Thanks for that comment, Philip. I think, I'm not sure if I thought about it exactly that way. So Jay, is there anything you want to say?
I would agree. I think we need to revisit the term resident. I think we weren't thinking that you had to reside in Boulder. I think anyone who participates in our community. So we need to come up with a better word. That's a good catch.
We have about 2 more slides that just really talk about what's next in where we've been on our process and what's next. And so are folks ready to just kind of do those final 2 slides and then any final questions or wrap-up comments? Okay. This is sort of where we've been so far with this process. We had a small staff group really work on the first draft of this strategic framework in affordability and inclusivity. And we went through some vetting with various mechanisms of our Housing and Human Services Department staff. And we revised the logic map models based on that input. And now we are in the process of talking to groups such as your board and getting input so that we can make the next round of revisions. And then we're going to be looking at, you know, what's the best process and the best timing for getting input beyond our own city mechanisms on these ideas about what HHS does and how we do it and what we're hoping to achieve. And the idea is that at some point when it's the right time and we have the capacity, then we would be turning this into a bigger strategy and the process that goes with the bigger strategy. Final slide, Jay. And I think we've already talked about some of these questions in our discussion on the logic models tonight, but these are some things we're looking to measure with our boards and commissions and advisory groups. What resonates with you, and how do you see this as a tool to accomplish our mission and educate the public? One thing I really like about this format is I think it's a lot easier than sending somebody a gigantic strategy document, which, you know, it really is a pretty historic methodology for our city and most cities. And also, do you have any feedback or ideas about how this might be a tool to help accomplish board and commission missions? So with that, I'll stop talking, and it looks like Juliet maybe has a comment or a question on that.
Wow, Wendy, this is awesome. Can I just say, like, this model is so pleasing to look at for so many reasons. One, it's very simple. It clearly outlines from beginning to end what you're seeking to accomplish, what tools you have, and what you want the outcomes to be. And what I really appreciate is under the outcomes section, almost every single one of them looks like a measurable outcome, something that you can actually put numbers to. I'm guessing that's your intention, right? Because you're looking to measure progress. through these different, as you move through these different periods. And so I think that that is an enormously helpful tool, because why do what you do, or why do what we do, unless we can set goals and based on the resources that we have, and then measure those goals to see how we've accomplished them. So I think I love this model. It's very simple. I love that it's measurable, and I certainly think the other thing that I'll comment on is, if you get stuck or lost in what you're doing, you can always come back to this model and redirect yourself and say, okay, is what we're doing, does it align with what we've set out to accomplish it? You can always come back and say, or does this align? And I think that's really helpful too, because it's easy to go down rabbit holes. It's easy to go off on tangents. And this is a way of recentering purpose and work. So I'm a huge fan. And I just want to say thank you. And I'd love to see this tested and piloted and applied elsewhere for testing.
Thanks for your comments, Juliet. And you reminded me of something else that we've really talked about in developing this framework, which is that, as you might imagine, right, a lot of people will come across ideas or programs that they would like the city to implement, or that they would like HHS to implement. And it is helpful to get back to a point you just raised, to be able to kind of go back to, what are our goals? What are we trying to achieve? And does this idea that's just come up, does that seem to match those things? And if not, then we probably need to have a bigger discussion of, oh, are we changing what HHS does now? So that's, I think, another really helpful aspect.
More feedback, input?
I just wanted to say thank you for putting this together. I'm sure it was quite timely and presenting tonight.
Thanks, Jen. Always good to see you.
Philip, did you have something else to add? And then Jacques?
Just a kind of a follow-up to what Juliet was saying. I also really love to measure things and to have objectives that you can sort of, see your progress. But I also just kind of throw this out there. I also love qualitative measurements and anecdotal evidence. And you might just consider like having a way to gather short stories or anecdotes that fit into some of the different categories of the things that you're trying to measure, just so that, because it adds some kind of texture to what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And so, and I think having those kinds of things can ground you in what is the meaning of this bump in 5% or this trajectory that we're on, or whatever. So anyways, just thought I'd add that as something you might also consider adding to the model.
That's a great point, Philip. And I think that also really aligns with our city's racial equity strategy and some of the comments that we've heard as that's been developed, which is, you can't always depend on just a set of numbers when you're measuring things. So I think that's a great comment.
Thank you. And Jacques, you have something to add?
I just wanted to add really briefly, Wendy, I think this is a great improvement over the long documents that one's used to reading. It's super useful for me to be able to look at it in this manner. And I think it's really helpful. And I want to also reiterate or kind of back up both of Philip's points that he made, especially the one about residents, because our community is a lot more than just its residents. And that is becoming more and more kind of critical in some ways as time goes on with the housing thing. So I think that's something, and Jay, you know, alluded to looking at that, but I think that's really critical. You know, a lot of my community in Boulder are not residents, but they're contributing members to our society and to our community. So that's just a huge piece for me to consider in this. But it's great as a document, and kind of the functionality of it's awesome. So thank you.
Thanks, Jacques.
And Jen, did you have another thing to add? Is your hand still up?
No, I apologize.
Oh, okay. Great. Well, I would certainly agree with the comments made by the board about the usefulness of this and the simplicity. Thank you for presenting. Does anyone have any additional feedback before we keep going with our agenda? Okay, well, thank you again, Wendy and Jay. Really strong work.
Thank you very much for having me at your meeting tonight.
Thanks, Wendy.
Appreciate
Bye,
the
Wendy.
presentation.
Thank you, Andy.
Have a good night.
Okay, thanks, everybody. On to item B. This is to discuss, or at least review, the Boulder City Council retreat outcomes. The retreat was held in January, and just a quick review. There was council came up with a top 10 priorities, at least as reported out by Councilman Yates. 7 of them were directly related to housing, which I think is great news for the relevance and potential influence of this board. I'll just go through the list. ADUs was on the list, middle income down payment program, which is approved by the Boulder by voters and has actually been launched. It's something to keep an eye on. The Area 3 planning reserve relates to 500 acres. The city could potentially annex and potential area to do a lot more middle income, missing middle housing with many steps in between to make that happen, but it is on the agenda. Completion of the transit village. This goes back 15 years now to the adoption of a transit village area plan. This is the area around 30th and Pearl. It's partly developed. There's still a lot of room for additional housing there. And there's certainly potential to, I guess, resuscitate actual transit in the transit village. The notion of a day shelter to supplement overnight shelter services. And as has been mentioned in this meeting, occupancy limits, which the voters rejected ballot measure 300 bedrooms for people last fall, but that is still very much a live issue. Inclusionary housing, we've discussed at some length. That's of course another potential missing middle leverage. And density and parking, somewhat certainly discussed in the East Arapahoe plan we just reviewed of how do you provide parking without allowing that parking to suck up all the land that could be available for housing. There were some really good ideas in the plan related to that. So I think this is just kind of a general review and discussion item, not for an action step, but it certainly relates to our mission. And I'd love to hear thoughts from board members on various priorities and how they might relate to our work. And then I have a proposal that is related to the council's work that I can discuss once we've had some general discussion.
Can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
You seem to be reading that off of a list. Do you have a link handy that I could read off the same list?
It's I could email it to you. It's not a link.
Oh, okay. These are notes that you've taken?
No, they were taken by Councilmember Bob Yates. And I think they're pretty impartial. I think he did a good job of reporting out, irrespective of his own point of view on those issues. But it's more than a list. There's discussion of the issues in his memo. I'd be happy to forward it.
I wasn't writing them down as you went, so.
Yeah, sorry, I probably should have sent that to you sooner. Want me to send it to you now, Philip? Okay.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, while I'm doing that, the discussion can certainly begin. Any thoughts or reactions to what you've heard about or read about related to the council retreat?
I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah. So are we supposed to only be focusing on the ADU portion that they spoke about at the retreat? I mean, I'm guessing that's our focus. But just curious if you're open to commentary on other items that move forward on the agenda.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand your question, Jen.
Well, I think that I thought that you just asked if any of us had comments on items that move forward on the city council retreat.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm asking, is that limited to the ADUs that move forward, or is that comments regarding anything that move forward on the retreat?
Oh, anything. I mean, we've identified our own priorities, and a lot of them are addressed within several of those priorities, but I think it's an open discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think the remarkable thing is that this council retreat, 7 of their 10 top priorities are directly related to housing.
Right.
Shows that the conversation has really shifted in the city. I mean, it's also shifted at the state and also at the federal level. So I think what Michael's getting at is this is, probably the big opportunity for the Housing Advisory Board to really potentially have an impact on this issue in the city. And so this is our chance to sort of really figure out what does that look like.
Yeah, I think I put that out as a lot to bite off. We could just have some discussion about are there any of these in particular we'd like to focus on in the next few meetings? ADUs, for example, the planning reserve, which is a big long-term project, the transit village, inclusionary housing.
Is your goal, Michael, to come up with a work plan? Is this discussion a means to come up with a work plan for the year? Is that why you're prompting us? Or I guess I wasn't prepared to discuss the list that you just mentioned, because I haven't looked at it in advance, and I'm not ready to really talk about it. So I guess I'm feeling a little caught off guard here. With that request, and it sounds like you have something you've been thinking a lot about, because it says chair's proposal on the agenda. So maybe you want to share with us what you're thinking, and maybe share the list, and we could take some time independently. And how does it relate to the work plan? Those are all what's going through my head right now.
Okay, well, I think thank you. I agree with you. I think we're trying to catch up after a little break here. And I do believe that several of those items do relate to a work plan we've already established. It might be useful to think about how to prioritize that and which issue we would like to focus on next, how we'd like to focus on it. I think it would be very reasonable to table that until the next meeting for a more robust discussion, as everyone is trying to catch up, as we haven't had an official meeting in a little while. So that, how does everyone feel about that? Taking it that way and having more time to prepare to discuss this is important stuff, but there's a lot of it, and maybe we need to think it through and prepare for it a little bit more than we have tonight.
Maybe we could apply that new model to this conversation, or the model that Wendy brought up. What was it called? The logic model?
logic model.
Yeah.
Interesting. Jack?
Yeah, I was just gonna, I think it's great that we're, as Juliet's kind of getting at, like, where's the board going to go with, as we know, we always have limited timing. As Philip kind of got a sense of today, when it's like, oh, are we going to have time to get anything put together before council looks at this at the next stage? So I had a question, Jay, for you. Is there any sense out of council yet what they may come to us about, which of these topics? Is there anything that's like going to be put on our plate that we know? I mean, I'm stepping out the door, so it's not we, it's you. But I'm just curious if there's been any of that discussion or.
I mean, my sense is everything that's housing related is going to come before you. Okay. So, but it's just a little bit of context to that discussion at council for those of you who weren't listening to the 2 days of discussions and deliberations. So staff was really clear that we don't have capacity for all of these priorities. And those 10 priorities, I mean, that's probably like 5 years worth of work minimum, and a huge burden on planning and development services and housing and human services, who are both woefully understaffed right now. So what our interim planning director made clear, what Kurt Fernarba made clear to council, is that a lot of these initiatives aren't even going to be able to get off the ground until the fall at the earliest. We need to get back up to an appropriate staffing level. And that's been proving to be extremely challenging. Even our human resources department is woefully understaffed. And so that's making it even more challenging to get staff hired in the different departments. Anyway, so just a little bit of context, but everything will go before HAB, but it's just a matter of time. And then I can go into more detail about individual projects and their time frame and what HAB's potential role will be. Some things are much farther out in the future, like the planning reserve, or even TVAP phase 2, the transit village. Those things are going to be years long, and they're going to require consultants and take a lot of time. I think my sense is, the focus, you should continue on your focus. Middle income is what you guys decided last fall. ADUs will hopefully start up in the fall as well. And we'll make sure we bring Jacques back for that. But yeah, that just to give you a sense of a bit of the context.
Thank you. Philip, you had another comment?
Yeah, so I wasn't sure if we had kind of shut down discussion about the outcomes of the retreat because of Juliet's concern about, like, what's the goal of the discussion? I guess I would just push back on that just a little bit and just say that I love the opportunity to just kind of open up for, what are your thoughts about all the things that came out of that retreat? So for my part, I'd love to just sort of kick around ideas that feel salient to me from the list that you sent. Of course, I have it in front of me now, so maybe I have an advantage there. But anyways, I'd love to discuss a couple of the things that you mentioned. But
great. I'd say take it away.
Yeah, so two of the things that kind of really stand out for me, one is related to the occupancy. And I sort of recognize that City Council seems excited to, or willing to pick this up and run with it. And I don't necessarily see us having a role in that in terms of work we need to do. I'm happy to weigh in on it, but I did want to just mention it to say that I was part of the Bedrooms Are for People campaign. I worked really hard to help get it passed, and I collected petitions. And I know Julianne was, I don't mean to speak for you, but I know Julianne was also involved. She was an intern with us. And it really hurt to see that not pass. One of the things that I often observe is that people who seem to be against that measure kind of frame the issue as if occupancy reform had been passed 20 years ago and had already ruined the city. And I think a kind of a more salient narrative about Boulder is that we have a huge vacancy problem. We have a lot of houses that are very large, that have 1 or 2 people in them. And we can't really even start imagining how to use that housing more efficiently or more inclusively, because it's not even legal to set those houses up in a way where the rooms could be used, like the woman who spoke earlier at the public forum. So anyways, I just wanted to make that comment that I'm glad that City Council is picking that up. I hope that we can learn to not normalize vacancy as the normal way that people live their lives in very large houses. It seems kind of like a symptom of our society and the disparities that we see. So that's all I had to say about occupancy. But I have another comment about another issue. I don't know if anyone else wanted to say something about occupancy.
One of the council priority issues.
Yeah, I have a comment on another.
Yeah, please.
Things. Yeah. The last one that was mentioned is related to density and parking. And one of the things I would like to say about this is that, when I think about parking, I think about, well, when people say they don't like density or they have anxiety about increased density, it's often related to cars and thinking about being stuck in traffic and not being able to get anywhere and feeling like you're choking on other people's exhaust. And I think that's a super valid concern. For my part, I think we have enough cars in Boulder. We have too many cars in Boulder. And when I think about density, and I mentioned this to you, Michael, when we were visiting, but when I think about density in Boulder, we have these very strong intuitions that increased density will increase traffic and increase the number of cars. And that's a good intuition to have because that's kind of true to what we see in Boulder. And I'd like us to start thinking about how if we could have the population go up and the number of cars go down, how much more beautiful Boulder could be in terms of walkability, in terms of less asphalt, less parking, super wide streets. And so I love the fact that density and parking here is a bullet in their outcomes of things they want to focus on. That's just commentary.
That's good commentary. I mean, that is on your last point. I think that's what the East Arapahoe plan is getting at. Let's have more people and fewer cars and more walkability. That's almost intrinsic to the idea of a 15-minute neighborhood. Certainly aspirational. It's a big ask type of goal, but I guess it's the type of thing we need to be aspiring to. And I'm sorry, now that I introduced that, maybe I can be a little clearer about it. I don't think we need to take action on any of these, but it is useful to have a discussion about which of those 7 points relate to our work plan. Maybe we can frame next month's meeting around that. And I'll give you my own reaction when I reviewed the council retreat, and that is we have a council now that is pretty savvy about housing issues. And I think you certainly describe them as pro-affordable housing. In a sense, it puts us in a position of advising a group of folks who or have already identified the issues, a lot of the key issues, and we can certainly add to them. So what is our role? And I had coffee with our mayor, Aaron Brockett, about a month ago to ask him that question. And he said, he brought up an issue that Jay just outlined, which is that there's a huge capacity issue among staff and elected officials and appointed officials like planning board. You can have all the great ideas you want, but getting them implemented, there's just not enough time in the day necessarily. So Aaron seemed to think that could actually be a role for HEB of providing some technical advice to move a particular issue forward. He gave the example of ADUs, like what kind of tweaks could be made to ADU policy that would allow for the production of more ADUs. Certainly Jacques got at that, taking the lead on the mobile ADU discussion we had last year. So I thought that was a pretty useful idea that's going to need a lot of teasing out. When you think about our role, we don't know. I don't think we need to tell them so much what to focus on, more like how can we help you get it done. So that is not an actual proposal. It's a notion I'm putting out there for further discussion. See how people feel about that as a role for HEB and how we might accomplish that one issue at a time, not a blanket for all these myriad and complex issues, but how can we be of service in that regard? And I think council would actually get a lot of benefit from us in doing that. And if we did it well, we could help make the types of changes we would like to see happen. So I'd like to hear some reactions to that thought. I don't think it's a big sea change in what we do, but maybe more of a focusing. I don't know if the logic model would help in that regard or not, but it's certainly an intriguing idea. Jacques.
Yeah, I just, again, it's weird speaking when I'm on my way out the door here, but I do think that what you discussed with Aaron, I think there's kind of two pieces to that. And I guess I'm kind of reflecting on the time I've had on the board and what, kind of how the board's developed and how we've interacted with council or not. And, I think that moving forward, I think it would be great to see the board take up more of that role of kind of technical advice. And the one cautionary piece I have about that, though, is, also to have the board, which is something I've always advocated for, be more kind of the tip of the spear a little bit. And it's great that council comes up with, there are 7 items here that are all related to housing. It's a ton of stuff on the plate. But I think there's also things that we as a board, or you guys as a board moving forward, might consider that are outside of this realm also. And it's always a difficulty with the number of people on the board and the amount of time and energy that's required for it. But one of the big pieces that falls under the how to get it done, especially I think when we talk about middle income housing and just affordable doors, are the funding mechanisms. So there's just one thing that I always keep coming back to and hounding with the affordable housing in Boulder, which is it's all great. I think that our funding mechanisms are significantly flawed in the sense that so much of that funding comes through growth itself. And so we're saying, oh, let's grow more to get more funding for growth, for, affordable housing. But, so anyway, I really like the thought of, thanks, Mike, of ADUs. Dinner just got delivered. So I really like the piece of the ADUs. It's coming up, it's on its plate. My little piece of the mobile ADUs was just a slice of things that could be done. But I only dared cut off one little slice, and there will be other pieces to that. And definitely, I think from my perspective, that's a great place for the board going forward to put a little bit more energy and helping council sort that out. And the middle income piece also. My take, kind of just to be riffing on it, on the occupancy limits. I was also sad not to see that pass, but in a sense, I feel like this is even a more appropriate venue for it to be managed and dealt with than the way that it kind of got played out as a ballot initiative. So, you know, if that's something that comes up again, you know, a great place for the board to get involved. So those are kind of my places of interest on this, and then with the funding piece as something that, you know, we could do a lot better with our affordable housing goals if we had better funding mechanisms. So those are kind of my pieces for that.
Thanks, Jacques. I agree that, you know, we should be looking to push innovative ideas, breaking the deadlock on key issues like finance. But we've also had the discussion, especially at our retreat, of, you know, we can only do so much, and what can we focus on where we'll be most effective. I agree with that point of view. And, you know, I'd be happy to grapple with those 7 over the next 9 months. And if we could think of something to say about any one of them or more than one of them and move things forward, that would be an accomplishment. But I appreciate your perspective. Let's see, Jen, you have your hand up.
Hi, thank you. Couple questions. So if we're talking about ADUs, are we limited to speaking about ADUs with pads? As I mean, I know that's what we move forward as our priority to City Council. So that's my first question. Or are we open to discussing other types of ADUs without pads, or what does that look like? That's my first question.
Definitely the latter. We want to talk about ways to expand the availability of ADUs throughout the city, or at least discuss that issue. And the council is, at least from Aaron's perspective, looking for help on ways of making that happen, specifically in terms of tweaking regulations. You know, there's still a lot of areas where ADUs are quite restricted, for example.
Correct. Okay, then my second question is and forgive me if these conversations have already had, you know, taken place. Seems to me that we're in a situation where we have very unique building codes, ordinances, whatever you want to call them, and that we cannot build in some percentage of open space. Point I'm getting at is we're running out of room to build. And so I'd like to see conversations about how we can use existing spaces to maximize housing outcomes. And for me, that would be looking at more SRO type housing, or that's HUD language, but you know, micro efficiency type of apartments for people. Because it's my opinion, if we don't start looking at alternatives, we're never going to make a dent in any of this. Thank you.
It's a really interesting comment, and thank you. Again, I'll reference the East Arapahoe plan. I think it's got some wonderful aspirations in that regard. If you look at that just strictly from the land use perspective, it's low density, inefficient land use, and a lot of it is single use. And that plan is striving to create a complex, denser, walkable, mixed-use community. So instead of having the point of view of, gosh, we're built out, there's nowhere to build, it's more like, hey, we actually have some areas that are thinly built that could be densified. And you know, East Arapahoe is going to be a very interesting test case for that. I agree with you also about, you know, the usefulness of SROs and micro housing. You know, a lot of people point to the decline of the SRO as a housing type as a major contributing factor to the increase in unhoused people, especially in cities like San Francisco. So I think that's, you know, it's not a missing middle issue, but it's certainly an important one worth discussing.
Right, but I mean, I think if we're looking at, one of my favorite things about community development is asset-based community development. You know, what this approach takes things as is right now, and instead of saying, these are all the things that are wrong, these are all the things, all the odds we have stacked against us, it takes everything that's already in place and uses it as a foundation to make things better. And so as I'm looking around the city of Boulder, I'm also cognizant of the fact that we can't have buildings higher than 3 stories. We can't build in so much percentage of the open space that surrounds us. And I'm saying to myself, we've got an increasing homeless population. This is a national issue and a real world problem in Boulder. We also have, since 2015, had well over 50% of the people who work here that couldn't afford to live here. And so if we don't start getting creative and maximizing the spaces that we have, we will never make a dent in this. And so I am looking forward to having conversations about creative ways to maximize housing outcomes with some of the very existing spaces we have in this community. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we're agreeing with each other on this. Again, I feel like East Arapahoe is a wonderful test case for transforming underused land to a place where more people can live and work in a walkable setting. And maybe we should be looking for other opportunities to create folks like that. Although it is part of a process, these sub-community plans get done one at a time and not that often. But, you know, it's a good example of what Joshua said about pushing it, being the tip of the spear and so forth. And, you know, these are huge issues. We shouldn't hold back, but at the same time, we have to keep a degree of focus if we're going to get anything done without scattering our resources. Philip, did you have another comment?
I sort of lost my train of thought on what I was going to say. I appreciated what Jen said about efficient use of land, and it makes me think of something else I'd like to talk about, but maybe I'll bring that up another time. The comment I wanted to make. Yeah, no, I think I'll just pass. I can't quite pull it together what I wanted to say, and I've been talking a lot tonight, so.
So I'm going to propose that we make a separate agenda item for our next meeting to discuss these retreat outcomes at greater length. They're really important. All 7 points are really important. And also the council has identified them as their priorities. So it is clearly the window for us to be influential. And I heard from several people they'd like more time to think it through. I could see us prioritizing which of those relate to our work plan and how we'd like to address them. This could be some outcomes from that discussion. How do folks feel about that? And if you're in agreement, we could possibly move on with our agenda.
I don't know if you were looking at, I don't know if you're looking at the screen, but a bunch of us gave thumbs up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was looking at the agenda, so I was not looking at the screen. Okay, great. I will also, I think the next item about missing middle income next steps can be addressed in that discussion next month. If you're agreed, we can move on to the housing equity symposium item D. And now I'll look and see if people are giving me thumbs up. I saw some thumbs up. So, okay, yeah, great. The Housing Equity Forum took place on November 10th, which seems like a long time ago. It was really great. To me, mainly an informational session. A lot of it was about the history of racist policies and shaping housing issues in Boulder. It was sold out, not as well attended in person. I think people were feeling cautious about COVID at that time. It may have been very well attended via Zoom. There were some really great presenters, including the head of the city council in Minneapolis, a city that has really made a major overhaul of their zoning regulations related to housing. Just love to hear from anyone who has thought about that and had consideration of how we might consider what was presented as part of the work our board does. Philip, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I went to that symposium and thought it was just really excellent. It's encouraging to me to hear people in the community who have some say talking about these things in ways that really are meaningful and productive. I also, one of the books that came up is called The Color of Law, which I know has been talked about in various, and for example, the planning board, every member of the planning board read that book a year or two ago. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that we come out of a kind of a white supremacist, racist history in many of our cities. Minneapolis is a city I grew up in. And I learned that the house that my parents bought in 1960 was part of a whites only VA loan program through the GI Bill. And it's sort of like no wonder when I came along and was going to school in the 80s that it was a nearly all white suburb that I grew up in. And I know some of those same dynamics are at play here in Boulder based on that symposium and based on things that I've read. And if we care about our neighbors and we care about diversity, then we really have to make these connections between the centuries and the decades that have gone before. Someone mentioned to me that Vietnam, that September 11th is my generation's Vietnam, in the sense that the people that have grown up since September 11th don't know about it, but all the older adults around them know about it, right? And so when I was growing up, I was born after Vietnam was kind of wound down, and I was surrounded by adults who all understood what Vietnam was about. And thinking about, we like to imagine that history is progressing and that we're distancing ourselves from history. But the truth is that my birth year is much closer to the end of World War II than the current year. And I can tell that I'm rambling and I should probably wrap this up. But the policies that went into place in the aughts and the teens and the 20s, 30s, 40s, all these things that happened that are described in The Color of Law, all are relevant to the situation that we see now here in Boulder. I just want to affirm what those folks were trying to do at that symposium, and we need to amplify their voices and be educating people about why things are the way they are. It's not all confusing and ambiguous. There's like really good historical reasons for why we're in the situation that we're in, and understanding that is like a step one in trying to unravel some of that.
Well, I thought it was a very good symposium. I thought it was more informational rather than looking at solutions, but you got to get the information first, right? I am curious, and I don't know if there's how you determine this, whether this message has reached a saturation point, like everyone who's willing to listen to it is already heard it, which is not to say that it should be set aside, but I wonder, like, how do you persuade people that this is really important and something that actually happened and continues to influence our housing choices today? Because I think, every action has a counter reaction, and there are folks that say, hey, that was yesterday, I'm not a racist, and we moved on. But I personally don't think that's true at all. But I think there is that sentiment exists in our community, and I do wonder how you communicate this message to folks that haven't been willing to listen so far, especially if they're folks who vote and can influence policies to change the situation. John?
Yeah, Michael, it just kind of in quick response, I think that, you're concerned about saturation, so to speak. I think the way to keep the conversation is just to start stepping into the solutions, and talking about it through the solutions of the problems that we have of the day. And then it can stay alive in that conversation without just being a consistent drumbeat of the same information coming into people. And I think that's how people also see, who don't necessarily relate to it. That's what gives them an avenue to start to relate to it when they see how it's actually impacting the thing. So as you said, the information's great, but then starting to translate that. And I think Jen's comment about kind of land use and how we're using the land we have, ties directly into that, right? Where our zoning is currently and how that's been impacted by our historic condition and our clear, resistance to change in that space. So I think that's the way to do it. Just keep, find the places where it's causing us pain, so to speak, and try to unravel those places in policy.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think, we've been educated on this issue. Not everybody, but certainly the people on this call. And the question for me is, what's next? What are we going to do about it? Jen, go ahead.
I just had a general question for everyone. I just want to know if I'm the only person who's concerned about the sustainability of our community. Is anyone else concerned about that? We've all but pushed nearly all of our middle class out of Boulder. And so my experience is that we really have three classes. We have people with too much, people with barely enough who are hanging on, and then people with nothing. And to me, without that middle class to act as a buffer, as a balance, to me, this is distressing in terms of what Boulder's going to look like in 10, 15, 20 years. I'm just curious if I'm the only one that thinks about that. And that was my question. Thank you.
I think I'm going to let Juliet answer that. She looks like she's ready to do that.
Well, I think that's the age-old question, the barbell model that people have been talking about for a long time, that you just very elegantly explained the two extremes of the population here from a socioeconomic standpoint. And I think I don't want to speak for everyone on this board, but I think that is a huge motivator for why people are showing up. I think it's something that is a huge problem in our community, and we have to figure out how to address it. And I think that's one of the reasons why we chose to focus on this middle income housing strategy, because that is a means by which we can address that missing middle piece through the actions of our board. So I think that it's on everyone's mind. Jana, you're not alone.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. And again, it's a social issue, equity issue. It's a transportation issue. It's a land use issue. It all kind of comes together around that. And as people leave Boulder, and we lose a lot in our community, and folks move to far-flung places. It contributes to sprawl and transportation problems. It's all related, but really at a gut level, it's, I think, important to everybody on this board, because we don't want to live in Aspen. We want to live in a complete community with all kinds of people. I don't think there's anybody to disagree with that, but if you do, you can certainly say so now.
Yeah, and I would just say that it's about all I worry about. So, and you know, for all the reasons, but probably the biggest one that's in my mind recently is over the last few years is democracy really doesn't exist without a middle class. So I think we're seeing some of that outcome already, the challenges. So yeah, I think we're all thinking about it.
Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead, Jen.
I was just saying thank you. I mean, I've only been serving on this board for a few months, and I had to miss a meeting. I was late today, and I apologize. And so I'm just trying to get a consensus here. It does concern me very much, that's all. And I feel like we only have so much time to reverse what has happened.
Right. And just to be explicit, we did identify that as our priority as an outcome of our retreat last year. So we are all definitely on board. I shouldn't speak for the new members, but we rapidly reached consensus on that issue. It is 8:50. I don't want to run over. It's been a long meeting. Got some good things done. Can we go on to our last agenda items?
Yeah, so I'm next up, but can I just say a few words about the Housing Equity Symposium?
Absolutely.
So one of our objectives in hosting that event was to not just provide the history, but get people starting to think about what were the unintended consequences of previous policy choices that were made in our community. And not necessarily to go back and reverse those, but to really think through future policy choices and the potential impacts on the composition of our community that you've been talking about. So to me, hopefully that came across, that this whole push for racial equity by our city council, they've all done trainings. You guys are going to get trainings also. They started with the staff. So I have a training tomorrow actually on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And how do we get more of that in our boards and commissions? And city council with the racial equity plan. I mean, so that's really what precipitated the event for us, was how do we start this community conversation? And I think the racial equity plan is going to help carry that through with our elected officials and how they make decisions in the future. And then I just also wanted to say, CU is definitely a big partner in putting that on. So we had 2 CU professors that work for the Boulder Affordable House, or work with the Boulder Affordable Housing Research Initiative. I think I got that right. And they are continuing their work and doing more of those qualitative storytelling pieces about what it's like to live in Boulder. And so we've been in discussions about sort of a follow-on to the Housing Equity Symposium. So I'm hopeful that sometime late spring, maybe early summer, I'll be able to share some news about sort of a follow-up event. So anyway, just wanted to share that little piece, and then I can move on to matters from staff. And
sorry, are you saying there might be a symposium part 2?
Some version, yes, but probably more CU focused. So
I see.
Something that the Boulder Affordable Housing Research Initiative would put on, and we would help support.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. If no one objects, we'll move on to matters from the staff.
So basically, main thing I want to talk about was our next meeting. So what I have on the April agenda is the continuation of this discussion about council retreat priorities. We're also it's election time. So you guys get to choose your new chair and vice chair. You can keep the same ones. You can vote them out of office. It's up to you guys. So if you have an interest in running for chair or vice chair, and in past experiences, Michael was elected chair and it was his first meeting, second meeting, maybe.
I think it was my first meeting.
Yeah, it was his first meeting. So he may be ready to pass on the baton, but he may also be willing to serve for another year. So anyway, keep that in mind.
If defeated in an election, I will concede gracefully.
Yeah, that's been our challenge, is getting, so usually people get nominated, not by themselves. We had talked about doing an overview of the affordable housing home ownership program. So basically the logistics of how that works. So one of our staff will be here to present on that. We'll keep that fairly short, maybe 30 minutes, 40 at the most. And then I did, as I mentioned, I wanted to preview the updated affordable housing dashboard. I'll give you a quick tour, so 10 minutes. But if there's anything else that you would like to discuss or about, let me know or let Michael know, and we'll make sure it gets on the agenda for the next meeting.
Right. Wouldn't we be voting on our recommendation on the
Yes.
East Rapo plan?
Thank you. I'll add that right now. Anything else?
Sorry, what was that last item, Jay? The recommendation on,
East Boulder subcommunity plan.
gotcha. Thank you.
Do folks feel that that's going to require a lot more discussion, or at that point we're just going to be ready to vote? Like, how much time do we need to put on the agenda for East Arapahoe?
Do we have any sense that they have time to incorporate anything that we might suggest anyways? I mean, to me, it seems like it would be at the level of wordsmithing, not so much substantive proposals, but.
Yeah, like I said, if you have input, I wouldn't wait till that meeting. Because it's going to be mostly done. So.
I wondered if he would drop off because I don't know if everyone else noticed that. I think everyone else's faces were still moving.
Yeah, sorry, I had a freeze up there and dropped off for a second, so I didn't hear I don't know if you heard my question. How much time do we need on the agenda for the East Boulder community plan?
You're back.
Yeah, I'm going to stop my video because something's wrong with my internet.
So my response is that if we think we're going to propose something substantive, that might require some time, but also it's less likely to be accepted or whatever. I mean, it seems like sorry.
Thanks. I'm having internet problems, but what I heard is that we need to give them a pretty simple recommendation that the staff will not have time to make further major changes or even tweaks. So we should be submitting recommendations as individuals before the next meeting directly to Kathleen and city staff.
I guess to me, the salient thing is like, if we're going to vote on whether we recommend it to city council and planning board, do we vote? I mean, if if we have concerns like hangups or gotchas or whatever, we should bring those up sometime before the meeting.
I believe we got an April 4th deadline to submit comments. Just to mention precedent, we did vote on a recommendation for form-based zoning for the Alpine Balsam a few months ago, and I believe that was just, you know, a simple affirmation of that project without further comment. It was like, yeah, we think you should consider adopting this with no explanation. Is that right, Jay?
Yeah, I mean, it's the board how they want to approach it. I mean, you still have the option to make a recommendation with caveats. Yeah, I mean, you'll have to see what comes out in the final plan.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just emphasizing that if you do have comments, please don't wait, because they've been working on this for 3 years, and
right,
this is going to be like the 4th or 5th time that it's been before HAB. So hopefully it has been brought along. I understand, Philip, this is fairly new to you. So
right. I recommend we give it 15-20 minutes on the agenda and to at least leave room for discussion. Any other comments about potential agenda items for next month?
Just a question. How did the speakers who spoke tonight, the guests that we had that presented, how did they get lined up? Did that get set at a previous meeting, or is that something that can happen between now and the next meeting? If we have ideas about people who ought to be presenting materials to us that might be relevant to, I don't know, the city council retreat outcomes or something. How does that work?
So the Jean and Kathleen were here, and I forgot his name already. The intern.
The intern.
They're the staff to the East Boulder subcommunity plan. So that's why they were invited to the meeting. So it's based on the agenda item topic. So we can talk more about sort of who gets invited. HAB has had some pretty lengthy conversations about who they invite as special speakers. And we can revisit that, but what did you have in mind, Philip, more specifically?
I was asking about the process from a process point of view, like how that actually.
Yeah, I would say if there's a topic that you're interested in and would like to learn more about, raise it with the group. And if everyone agrees, I'll work on getting it scheduled and figuring out who the appropriate person is to present.
Okay, so I think the answer you gave me is that the fact that they came and presented was discussed at a meeting prior to that, and it was like voted on or agreed upon at that time.
We don't always vote on all the agenda items, but there's a work plan that you'll get before the next meeting with the draft agenda that will have sort of the next 3 months of meetings and what we anticipate will be on the agenda. And then that's what drives who's there. Yeah. So, and what's on the agenda. And then, so you'll have up until after the chairs will meet when do we meet? 2 weeks before?
I think that's right.
Yeah. So we meet basically halfway between meetings, and that's where we basically set the agenda, finalize it. And then that gets distributed a week before with all the materials. Does that help?
Regarding the presentation on for sale deed restricted housing, I would recommend we move that beyond the next meeting. It's a really important subject, but I'd like to give it some time. And in addition, I personally would like to hear about the successes and challenges of the program, not just a review of what it is with factual data, but some qualitative analysis of what's working and what is not working. I think that'll be very important for us moving forward to determine our middle income housing strategy. Okay, anything else in terms of debriefing from this meeting? Calendar check, when is the next meeting?
I think we said the
April
27th.
27th.
Great, and that will almost certainly be a Zoom.
Yes, that's correct.
Julian will be a full member by then, which is great. We'll miss Jacques, but we'll hope he'll attend. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Can I just mention one thing? I forwarded an email about the Affordable Housing Summit that's being put on by the Colorado Real Estate Journal. I just forwarded the email to everybody so that you're aware of it. It's a summit you have to register. There's a registration fee, but it's from the developer standpoint, and it's more broadly for Colorado. So if anyone's interested in that, you'll have an email about it in your inbox.
Thanks, I've attended those. They're good.
But I've attended other things that they've put together in the past.
Thank you. Anything else? Motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
A motion seconded, all in favor?
Second.
Okay, we'll be talking soon and see everybody next month.
Not
Thank
me.
you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Good
Corey.
night.
Thank you.
Members.
Okay, and thank you, Jacques. Thanks for being here.
We'll miss you.
Absolutely, yeah. Good luck moving forward, everybody. We'll see you out there.
Welcome,
And-
Julian and Philip. Bye.
Thank you, Corey, and welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you. Good night,
You're welcome.
everyone.
Good night.